Welcome to Down to Business with V, a show dedicated to bringing you actionable information to help protect you, your families, your businesses, and the community. I'm your host V, and today we're discussing the Internet of Things, smart devices, and your privacy. We've called in an expert from the University of West Florida's Center for Cybersecurity to give you tips on how to keep your information safe. And as always, we'll show you what to do if you're a victim. Let's get down to business.
From Atlanta, Georgia, to becoming a United States Marine, to Washington, D.C., and every place in between, everybody calls me V. My goal is to bring you resources, education, and knowledge from sources you can trust that informs and protects to safeguard our families, our businesses, and the community. Now let's get down to business.
Welcome to Down to Business with V. I'm your host V, and today we're discussing the Internet of Things, smart devices, and privacy. And we have called in an expert from the UWF Center for Cybersecurity, Mr. Anthony Pinto. Mr. Pinto teaches graduate and undergraduate courses in computer science and software engineering. He joined the faculty in 2002 after he earned his Master's of Science in Computer Science from UWF. Mr. Pinto, who spent 20 years on active duty with the Marine Corps, Semper Fi, Oorah Devil Dog, has several years of experience in training in business-related software development and cybersecurity. Mr. Pinto coordinated UWF's successful effort to be designated a national security agency and a Department Homeland of Security National Center for Academic Excellence in Cyber Education. That's huge. In addition, he is heavily involved in efforts to enhance cybersecurity education in the area, including being a mentor for Cyber Patriot, Cyberthon, as well as the faculty advisor for the UWF Cybersecurity Center. And he's also a coach for the Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition. Mr. Pinto, you are very, very busy. Professional training includes Wireshark, Advanced Network Analysis, Black Hat certification, and Hacking by the Numbers Bootcamp, Hacking by the Numbers Black Ops, pen testing with Kali Linux, locking down Linux, and adaptive red team tactics. You are super busy, super credentialed. Welcome, Mr. Pinto.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. So today we're going to be discussing the Internet of Things and what that is and how it's impacting our audiences, and then just some of the caveats, that go along with these technologies and just how things are advancing. So for those that aren't aware, can you just share a little bit about what the Internet of Things is?
Okay, so as you know, the internet is the interconnection of networks that we all use from our computers to go to Amazon and ESPN and everywhere else. But there's also all these other devices now that over the last 10 years or so have come into play. Webcams that connect to the network, smart ringers like you have on the front, smart locks, you got crock pots that connect to the internet that you can check and turn on and things like that. So all those other things that aren't necessarily a PC are considered the Internet of Things. So anything you could think of that connects.
Yeah, I've heard of the smart refrigerators.
There are smart refrigerators. There was a story where somebody actually hacked a bunch of refrigerators and did the refrigerator denial of service attack on another server, a company. So basically they got all these refrigerators to attack at one time and connect to one server. And the server has so many active ports and opened and so much activity that it gets overwhelmed and can't handle it.
Wow.
Yeah,
the most just kind of crazy. They get really creative.
They do. They're very smart people, for
very
sure.
smart. I wish they'd use their intellect for good, not for evil.
Some of them do.
Some of them do. You are correct. So, we're hearing about smart homes, even here in the area, that the homes are coming already connected with all of those devices, that are interfacing with networks and servers. Can you talk about just some of the privacy concerns that, some of the users in my experience? I know that people have said that they do have concerns about that.
Sure. The biggest issue with the Internet of Things and smaller devices, like your Amazon Alexas or your Google Talks and all those kind of things, is they're small. They don't have a lot of resources, so it's hard to put a lot of protection on that particular device, right? It's hard to run like a firewall and virus scanner, so they rely on the network around them. So they're easier to get into. If you can get a Wi-Fi connection or some kind of connection to that, they're much easier to hack, much easier to be vulnerable. Plus, like the way industry does things is they build things very quickly to get it out the door, to market it and stuff, and they don't always think about how to secure this. And so, like we said, hackers are pretty smart, and they take things as a challenge too. And so that's the issue of the availability of those type of things to be hacked and broken into and things like that.
Yeah, I heard a story where a user had, I think his thermostat was connected to the Internet of Things, was connected to the smart home. It was hacked, and this hacker was not only speaking over the loudspeaker in their home, but was adjusting the thermostat, turning on the heat in the middle of summer, and doing things like that. So that's just one example of how those smart homes and smart devices can be compromised. What can a user do, a homeowner do, or an end user do to kind of like alleviate some of these things?
Well, protect your network is one of the biggest things. What happens a lot of times is people think you get a router, right? You get your router and your cable modem or whatever you're using to connect. That has a password separate from your Wi-Fi password that allows you to set up a configuration on the router or the wireless network of who can access and a lot of different things. And those passwords are defaulted to the type of router that it is. So when you buy one, it's a default password. If you don't change that, someone can figure out fairly easily what kind of router you have. They can connect to your network, connect to that router and change things and allow them in, block you out, do all kinds of different things. So that's one thing that a lot of people forget to do. If they don't have it set up by a professional, and you don't necessarily have to, there's all kinds of YouTube video and documents, tutorials on how to do this, to go into that configuration page and change that password. Pay attention, run virus scanners where you can. Pay attention to things like that. There's not too many other things you can do. Most of those devices don't have their own individual like firewalls or virus scanners. But that's a big one that happens often.
Yeah, I remember in our preliminary conversation, you talked about how easy it is if someone knows what brand your router is.
That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, to find that, which was shocking to me.
Yeah, right. Like if you have a D-Link router, you can look up on D-Link's site. They'll tell you what the default password is.
That's crazy.
Or Netgear or whatever, and they'll list the types and what the default passwords are for sure. So that's why you should change them as soon as you put it in.
Yeah.
To something reasonable. It doesn't have to be, 40 characters, but something 10 characters or more are really hard to break by brute force, something like that. Maybe a couple special characters or something, but something other than whatever the default is.
Absolutely, and I think most people assume, even if they're having it installed by a professional, I think they assume that default password is sufficient. It's good enough.
Right.
One wouldn't assume that every router in existence from that manufacturer has the same default password. One would assume that it's unique, but it's not.
No, it's not, because that would be hard to keep track of, right? You'd have to create documentation based on, I guess, the serial number of what the password would be, and that would be really, really hard to manage and keep logistics. And if people forget, because what happens is if you forget your password, usually there's a way to reset the router. Might have a button, or sometimes you get like a paper clip and hit that little, and it'll reset the router, go back to the default settings, which includes the default password. And so if they didn't do that, if they had a separate one for each default, that would make things really messy and complicated.
Yeah, it makes sense from a logistical standpoint.
Yes. They expect you to change it.
Yeah, they expect you to change it. I think that's what our viewers need to hear.
Yeah,
they expect
they
you
do.
to change it.
They
So
do
that
expect
default
you.
password is there for
Yes, ma'am.
yeah, for reasons of just getting you set up,
Yes, just to
yeah.
get started.
just for the installation process. You know, we've heard stories about, you know, how malicious actors are hacking these devices. Tell us from an expert perspective, like, how are they doing this? And, you know, you talked a little bit about how we can defend ourselves against it, but how are they doing this? Like, if we're a random person in a random city, which is what most people think, nobody's out to attack me. How are these malicious actors targeting their victims?
Well, that's usually the case, but they'll try different things. Like social engineering is a big way, right? Because if they'll target you, if they're interested, and find information about you through your social media posts, pretending to be a friend, and they can start gathering information. And a lot of times people set up passwords based on birth dates or kids' names or combinations of birth dates and kids' names and things like that. So a lot of times it's kind of easy to guess passwords, for one thing. Other things is devices are built with vulnerabilities, and they're posted. There's vulnerability databases out there that tell you devices, operating systems, what the vulnerabilities are, if they're patched or not, but not always. So if you don't keep your systems patched or updated and things like that, it's possible for somebody to find a way in. I don't want to get too technical, but basically that's what happens, because everything's out in the air, right? So I know you're broadcasting Wi-Fi. I'm a neighbor. I see what kind of Wi-Fi you're using. If it's not encrypted, I can monitor traffic, sniff it, pull it off and look at it, see what's going on, that kind of thing.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And a little, you know, concerning.
It is.
Which is why you're here, is to, you know, provide that insight. Yeah, to let our audience know what can happen and how they can protect themselves against it.
Right. I mean, we want the convenience of the internet, right? The availability of data. But that comes with security concerns. If we were completely secure, that would be great, but nothing would be available, or very little, right?
Right.
Unless we're all honest, then we don't need cybersecurity anymore.
Exactly. Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah.
Well, when we come back, we will talk a little more about the Internet of Things, smart devices, smart homes, and our privacy, and what we can do to protect it. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Down to Business with V. I'm your host, V, and today we're discussing the Internet of Things, smart devices, and your privacy. And today we've called into the studio cybersecurity expert from the University of West Florida's Center for Cybersecurity, Mr. Anthony Pinto. He's with us here today sharing his expertise. Welcome again.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So in the first segment, we talked about the Internet of Things, what it is, what smart devices are, and talked a little bit about privacy. So for those that might have just tuned in, can you share a little bit about, just recap very briefly, what the Internet of Things is, smart devices, and how we can protect that privacy?
So the Internet of Things is just any other device other than probably a PC or a server that connects to the internet. And smart devices kind of fall under that broad category. So smart devices are things like Alexa or something like that, or your thermostat that connects so you can set your temperature on your cell phone, or like we talked about, a refrigerator that has a camera that you can look inside and see what's in there, or upload a shopping list from there or something like that. So pretty much anything that connects is Internet of Things, and the smart is just stuff that does kind of smart things that you could use that are helpful to you. Just like a smartphone versus a flip phone or something like that.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, smart versus flip. I love the analogy. I'm very excited about like some of the potential for these technologies, and we kind of talked a little bit about how to protect ourselves with the router and ensuring that we change the passwords and things like that you shared earlier in the first segment. There are some technical terms that we hear a lot in the world of cybersecurity. You're an expert, a professor, and you use these terms quite often, in your day-to-day life.
Sure.
A lot of our viewers might hear these and they have no idea what we're talking about. So I want to just throw out a few for you and have you clarify for the audience what these are in terms of cybersecurity.
Okay.
So the first is CIA. When we think CIA or hear it, we think Central Intelligence Agency.
Correct.
In terms of cybersecurity, explain what CIA is.
It's a triad or a triangle: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And it has to do with data, right? So the idea of confidentiality is the data is secure. It's not open. If you have a bank, I don't want everybody to know my bank account information. So that's the idea of confidence. Integrity means that the data is correct. Like if I'm making business decisions through some application and I'm the CIO or the CFO, I want to make sure that, I want to know that that data is accurate. It hasn't been compromised in some way or it's garbage, right? So that's the integrity. And then the availability is that it's available, that people can access it. It doesn't do us any good if it's not there, if I can't get to it. But it's a combination of those things, because have confidentiality, you have to secure things and make sure people can't access it that shouldn't, but you also have to be able to allow people to access it that should. So that's always the kind of the issue, and that's why they call it a triangle, because they each affect the other one.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense.
Okay.
And a lot of times we hear this in, corporate settings or, in educational, institutional settings.
Right.
But our homeowners can use this as well, the CIA acronym, because you're protecting information. When you have visitors in your home, they might come in and need your Wi-Fi password. Yeah. So it applies to them as well.
Sure. That's why a lot of routers have, like, you can have in a home network, you can have a guest password that you can set up to limit where it can see what it can see. It can only have, access out to the internet, but not to see any of the other devices in the network and things like that. So, sure, you can set up confidentiality. You can secure files. You can secure directories. That you could even encrypt data on your system. You know what I mean, like BitLocker and those kinds of things that allow you to lock things up in case somebody does get in. If you have sensitive data, if you're a small business owner or something like that and you work out of your house, you might want to think about encrypting the data on your system so that if somebody does get in, they can't get to all the encrypted stuff, that kind of thing. Backing it up too is a big deal. You probably heard of like ransomware attacks,
yes,
right? Where they basically encrypt your hard drive or your servers and you can't. The one way to fight that is if you have data that's backed up, you can wipe that machine and restore the data and may lose just some of the data since the last backup, because they don't usually affect systems like Windows 10. You can just reinstall it or whatever and everything should work. But if you don't back up your data and it's encrypted, then you're kind of stuck. You may have to pay it or lose that data.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay.
Back it up. I like
definitely.
Yes, I like that you touched on encryption, and that was one of the terms that I wanted you to clarify for our audience. End-to-end encryption.
Okay.
Please clarify what that is for them and how they can achieve it.
So I guess the easiest way to explain it is to explain what it's not. Like if you go out to a web page and type HTTP, right, that's in clear text. So any transactions between those is just text. So if I can intercept it, I can read the data. It just shows up. If it's conversation, text message, emails, or whatever, I can pull it down, and if I know the format, I can read it. But encryption takes the data and runs it through an encryption algorithm. Like in the old days as kids, you might have sent somebody a note, and instead of A, you say your encryption key is C. There's 3, so A turns into C, B turns into D, right? And then somebody decrypts it. So it's like that, but much more complicated, right? So end-to-end is just anything leaving my computer going to wherever it's going is encrypted. so that if somebody does intercept it, it's just garbage. Because the encryption algorithms now are almost impossible to break. The encryption algorithm, it's kind of complicated, and it's a math problem, but it's basically very, very difficult to break encryption. And so what they can do is, you probably heard of VPNs, right? Virtual private networks that you can buy for your phone. So what a VPN does is it takes the data leaving your computer, encrypts it, and sends it to a VPN server. The VPN server then decrypts it and sends it to where it's going to go. So if anybody intercepts my stuff going back, they don't know what it is, whether it's going to a bank or whatever, something like that. Now, adding to that, when you go to a site that's HTTPS, like a bank, is secure, and so the data is encrypted from the start. But not everything goes to HTTP or goes to the web. Your systems communicate over a lot of different things. Applications talk to each other through the internet all the time. You connect to databases and other things, gaming and updates and all kinds of stuff. So hopefully I didn't talk about that too much.
No,
but,
that's awesome.
But the idea of end-to-end is beginning to end.
Yes, I love that. And I love that you shared and what you shared, specifically the VPNs.
Right, VPN, right.
Yeah, how our homeowners and small business owners can use a VPN to secure their interactions over the web.
Yeah, I should probably mention too, the VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. So it's almost like you have a plug from your computer to wherever you're going, a single plug. It's virtual, but you're plugging it into that system. And so nobody else can get to it because it's just one plug. Kind of, you can think of it that way. Obviously it's not, it's electronics, but there's an encasing, an encrypted encasing around your traffic that keeps it like it's a single plug going out to wherever you're trying to get to.
Thank you. I love that you clarified what VPN is. We do it a lot just in talking about the things.
People talk about those things. And
yeah, and forget to kind of explain for those that don't know what that is. I love the idea of that and explaining like the process of that end-to-end encryption. There is another term that I wanted you to clarify for us. Convenience, security, freedom. Tell our viewers what it is, first of all, and then how it applies to them as well.
So convenience is sort of along the lines of availability. I want to be able to use the internet and do the things. I want to be able to shop on Amazon or chat with my friends or download movies and watch stuff, right? So I want it to be very convenient. But the security part is, how do we do that securely where somebody else doesn't intercept my subscription to something or get my data that they're not supposed to get. And the freedom part relates to that in that, like, the government could apply control over the internet and, like, really lock it down to where, okay, it's very secure. You're not going to be able to do anything, but we have a lot of control, but then you don't have freedom. Companies don't have freedom to do what they want. I don't have the freedom to say what I want, to talk to who I want to listen to which blogs I want to, or whatever. So it's a triangle again, and each one affects the other. And so you try to create a balance there because you can't have 100% of all three of them, right? That's kind of what it's talking about. It's kind of what we're doing there. That makes sense.
Yes, makes perfect sense. There are those viewers that might be watching, and we talked about the Internet of Things, we talked about smart devices and our privacy. There might be someone at home that had a compromise on some of their devices. What would you recommend they do in an instance where they've been compromised in the last 2 minutes that we have for the show?
Well, as I mentioned before, as far as like compromise, the best way to manage that is if you have backup of your data, because data is what gets compromised. Usually operating systems or software you can re-add. So definitely back things up. Try to secure it as best you can. And then if it's like identity theft or something else like that, certainly usually you have to make a police report, and then you're not responsible for anything if they use your identity for something else like that. The other thing is what I have is there's a few different organizations that sell like identity theft insurance. And it doesn't necessarily prevent identity theft, but identity theft recovery is an arduous process, and they'll help with that. They'll tell you what to do. A lot of them have somebody that from customer service that'll be assigned your case and deal with notifying the banks and canceling credit cards and doing all the other things that you have to do if you have identity theft. And I think that's part of what you were asking, right?
Absolutely. Mr. Pinto, Mr. Anthony Pinto from the UWF Center for Cybersecurity, thank you so much for being with us today. We certainly do appreciate you.
You're welcome.
I'd like to thank our guest, the esteemed professor, Mr. Anthony Pinto from the University of West Florida's Center for Cybersecurity. We certainly do appreciate you for sharing your insight and expertise with our audience today. If you or someone you know has been a victim of a data breach, account compromise, or any other type of cybercrime, be sure to contact your local police or the FBI at ic3.gov. Also be sure to visit our sponsors, Vicar Group LLC, business consultants for Generation U, at their website, www.vicargroup.com. Also, if you'd like to be a sponsor of the show, if you'd like to be a guest on the show, or if you have show ideas, please visit our website at dtbwithv.com. I'd like to thank you for tuning in today, and I'd like to thank our crew for making today's show possible. Hannah, Eric, Peter, Stephen, Suzanne, and Doug, thank you for all that you do to ensure that this show goes off without a hitch. I am V. This is Down to Business with V. We'll see you next time.